Hello, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on what time it is in the world when you're listening to this podcast or watching on the YouTube video. I'm joined today by Randy Schaub, my long-running friend and collaborator in the community, and he's here today to talk about Kubernetes because once upon a time, Randy had a front row seat to the development of Kubernetes. He watched it grow out of Borg. He knows the team, he knows Google well. And after our last podcast about Kubernetes and its origin, Randy and I have been chatting, and so I've invited him on for this bonus podcast today. Randy, welcome.
Thanks, Jamie. It was a lot of fun to be able to figure out how to make this work.
Absolutely, and of course I had to pronounce your surname correctly, didn't I?
It's misspelled, so everybody makes the mistake.
Now, is that because of its European origins, or what's the story there, Randy?
Yeah, Schaup is a German word. Both sides of my family are originally from the German-speaking part of Switzerland, back several generations, and it should be spelled Schaub. And in German, you soften the last consonant, so Schaup is the pronunciation. When my family, probably my illiterate farmer ancestor, came through Ellis Island, he probably didn't speak, he couldn't write, so the person wrote down what they thought they heard, and we went from there.
Unbelievable story. So, Randy, tell us about your time at Google, because once upon a time you were running engineering for the App Engine team, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. So I joined Google in 2012, and right before all of Google Cloud Platform was announced. So at the time I joined, I was joining to be director of engineering for Google App Engine. So for those who don't know or don't remember, it's the platform as a service. So think Heroku or Engine Yard or Cloud Foundry. And it's been around as long as cloud computing. So it first launched in 2006. So people maybe forget that App Engine, just like the early services at AWS, is a long-lived part of the cloud community. And so next to me in the Google Cloud Platform setup were people building Google Compute Engine. So that's the compute similar to EC2 on AWS. And the two of the three Kubernetes co-founders worked on that group, and then the third of the Kubernetes co-founders worked in a closer sister group to App Engine. And so I can tell a little bit the story about the name and how the people all got together. I will though preface by saying I had nothing to do with Kubernetes. So if anybody's thinking that like Randy's taking credit for I didn't do anything. I just happened to be next to three people that I really like and respect very much, and use their stuff every day today.
And when you say next to, do you mean physically next to, in the same building?
Physically next to, yeah, absolutely. Actually, all three of them worked out of the Seattle office where I live in the Bay Area, but we were constantly in both virtual and physical communication. I mean, again, Compute Engine and App Engine, lots of similarities. We were working together on lots of different things.
Before we jump into Kubernetes and compute, tell us a bit more about App Engine. Was it meant to help people write web scale applications? Was it a new version of Java applets? Give us a bit of insights into that.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, so I wasn't there for the origin story, but I think I can tell it. So the origin story was uh, inside Google at the time of 2006. They had cloud computing. In fact, inside Google in 2000, they had cloud computing. They just didn't call it. They called it that. They called it warehouse computing and various different things. But all the things that we're familiar with today were available in Google maybe 5 or 10 years ahead of the rest of the industry. So the thought among several people who worked on Borg, which was the internal system that managed everything, we can talk more about that, but several of those people had the idea of could we bring Borg outside to the masses? And so that's what ultimately became App Engine. And all of the thinking behind the APIs that it exposes to the users and all the thinking behind the infrastructure all came out of the experience of at that time running Borg for let's call it 5 years at least, but running web applications at scale internally at Google. A funny thing, since we're going to talk about naming, is the code name inside Google for App Engine was Prometheus.
Right.
And so Prometheus, let's remember a bit our Greek mythological history. Why Prometheus was the god that gave fire to the humans and was therefore punished for it eternally. So you can imagine a little bit the cleverness or the hubris that was around Prometheus. This is like Google bringing fire to the rest of the world. So App Engine is the Prometheus.
And what was the punishment? What is the eternal punishment?
I believe an eagle constantly eats his liver. So
Right.
he's chained to a mountain, and yeah. So
That's right. And every evening his liver regenerates. But my question is to you, what's Google's eternal punishment for releasing fire?
that's an excellent question. Wow. I mean, I will tell a little bit the story if you don't mind riffing off of that. So when I agreed to join Google, the way Google The way Google hiring worked at the time was there were two phases: decide whether Randy should be at Google, and then separately and totally independently decide which particular group Randy should join. And so once I passed that first thing, we're like, okay, Randy passed the bar. You can come inside. I got to interview then, casually with a bunch of different groups, and I interviewed with the App Engine group. And so I spoke with the person who later became my boss, Peter Magnuson, and then the product person, and each of them independently asked me, hey, what do you think about Google's cloud strategy? And again, remember, GCP does not exist at this time, but AWS does. So I'm like, well, gulp. I think you're doing it wrong. I think AWS is going to win because they built the lower level of the infrastructure, and they're just going to continue to build the pyramid on top of that. Whereas all y'all have is App Engine. You have the peak of the pyramid, but nothing underneath. And so I think that's not going to work.
At the time, just before Amazon sort of kicked off AWS as it would later become, they were reading a book in their book club, and it was about the building blocks of life, the primitives, DNA, cells, and all of that. And
Yeah.
they said, what are the 4 or 5 primitives that every web scale application needs? They need compute, they need storage, they need payments. If we've got those 5, we've got a starting point. And then, as you said, they started to climb up the stack thereafter with their services.
Right, right. So let me just close this loop very briefly. Oh, first interview, I think you're doing it wrong. Second interview, same question. I think you're doing it wrong. We get through the whole set of interviews. I get a call later that day from the person who later became my boss. And I said, okay, Randy, when do you want to start? And I said, Peter, I don't know. I'm not sure if I communicated effectively. I don't think your strategy is a good strategy. And he's like, no, you're be a perfect fit. You know Heroku from before. You're going to be able to help us out a lot. I'm like, Peter, I love all of you. I think you guys are great. It sounds like a great technical challenge, but I just don't get the strategy. And he's like, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but 2 months from now at Google I/O, we're going to announce Google Compute Engine, Google Cloud Storage, tick, 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 all the building blocks of life that you say. And I said, okay, I'm on board. And
Excellent, excellent. Right, now one thing I need to tell you about Prometheus. Do you know he had a brother, Epithemus? So pro meaning the ability to look forward. So Prometheus was intelligent. So that's why they
yeah,
talk about Robert Oppenheimer being the modern Promethean who stole fire from the gods. They spoke about Thomas Edison stealing lightning, the thunderbolts of Zeus. But Epithemus could only understand life by looking backwards. So
wow.
he had no foresight, he only had hindsight. And I think Epithemus got Prometheus into trouble. I think he started the chain of events that ended up with poor Prometheus being chained to that rock and having his liver pecked out every day.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so you're at App Engine, you've completely spotted a hole in Google's strategy, so go you. And luckily for you, they're in the process of closing that, and they were going to announce that shortly. Now, what is the relationship then between the announcement that was about to be made and the work that the Kubernetes team, were about to embark upon?
Yeah, so at the time in early 2012, all three of the Kubernetes co-founders, so that's Brendan Burns, that's Joe Betta, and that's Craig McCluckey, they were all working hard on getting getting this stuff out. And again, as I mentioned, Joe and Craig worked on Compute Engine, so the technical lead and the product lead, respectively. And then Brendan was working on sort of special projects like directly next to my team. So I don't know where the exact idea came from, but like as they rolled all this stuff out, they were thinking, well, we'd love to bring not just App Engine and these individual capabilities in the form of storage and compute, but how can we bring the entire beauty of Borg, which we can talk about in a second, which is the underlying infrastructure at Google then and now that does all the resource management and assigns containers to machines and manages the whole world. And so how could they bring that to the masses? And all three of them, I believe, previously worked in the Borg team. So
Was there never a discussion about open sourcing Borg? Was that never on the table?
I mean, I was never part of those discussions, but it wouldn't really have worked. I mean, something that's grown up in a company for 10 years that wasn't built. I mean, it's built beautifully
Yeah.
and iterated upon by brilliant people for many years. But also they thought they could do it one better. So I'm jumping around a little bit, but Brendan's contribution was so Borg, at least at the time, only thought about individual containers, and the concept of pods didn't exist as a reified concept in Borg.
Right.
But it was Brendan's insight, if I remember correctly, that you know what? Every single time we deploy something, we deploy the main app plus a monitoring agent plus a thing plus another thing. And so the actual The actual deployment unit was in the form of multiple containers that should work together as a pod. And so that was one insight. The other insight, obviously, was within Google. I like to say Google's like Australia, where it looks very different inside from the rest of the world, but it's a completely every ecosystem niche is filled, but like they're all marsupials, right? Like it's a fully formed, perfect, like beautiful ecosystem in the way ecosystems work. And then you're from the outside, you're like, that's weird.
I suppose Borg was custom tailor-made for what Google were doing.
Absolutely. And Borg was, as far as I'm aware, the first thing of its kind, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Kubernetes was going to be more for a general audience to be used by many different companies, I suppose, to succeed with their infrastructure.
Let me, not exactly, but close. So Borg does everything at Google, or runs everything at Google, and had done for, I'm making it up, since 2000 or 2005, like for essentially forever,
Right, right.
in Google time, and and it's just magical. So anybody who had experienced that in 2006 or even in 2012, when they wanted to go somewhere else, they like, I really would like to bring Borg with me because it's
Right.
absolutely outrageously good, and was it absolutely world class, and I have no reason to think it's not world class today. So one thing that, although the other thing though is what I was saying about Google's ecosystem is they don't run third-party software for the most part, right? Google builds all of its own software. So one of the things Brendan and then also Joe and Craig wanted to do is expose the Borg capabilities, but also be able to run things like Redis, which Google doesn't run internally. They have their own their own mechanisms for doing memory at scale. So bringing in like third-party open source or otherwise capabilities. But to your specific point about, is Kubernetes intended to be more broad-based, not in its capabilities, but maybe the way to say it is like it's being able to use things that aren't just Google.
And what was the financial or the commercial angle of this? So you've got brilliant engineers, Brendan and the gang, working on a brilliant piece of open source software that's been a complete gift to the world. What was Google's take? Were they hoping to make money with it? Were they hoping to drive people to their cloud? Or were they just being good citizens and thinking, well, this is a nice project to do and something that is worth kicking off?
Yeah, so here's where I wasn't part for all of that. I mean, I can tell you what I know as just as much as anybody else would know is that it was, I mean, all credit to those three. I think particularly the Craig McCluskey part of the three, around really getting Google to see that by open sourcing it, it would be valuable. It'd be a gift to the world, and also the incredible insight of forming the CNCF and gifting. People might not remember that Kubernetes was the project around which CNCF was founded. That was the purpose of forming the CNCF inside the Linux Foundation, was in order to open source this. And now you look back and there's like 100 or 200, different projects in there. But what was the financial one? Again, I wasn't there for any of those conversations. I'd moved on at that point. But looking back, it was like Google's not going to. Google's not going to make direct money off of that thing, but again, driving more capability.
You speak about the open source tools just around the corner from us, well, for me at least, in London, thousands of people, hundreds of projects at KubeCon right now. And I suppose, I mean, when did the CNCF get founded? Was it 10 years ago?
So again,
Maybe.
I observe these all from the outside. Again, I don't want to give any the impression that I was an insider to these things, but I want to say 2014, 2015.
Yeah,
I mean, they open sourced Kubernetes, and it was less than a year, I guarantee, before they put the structure around it, if that makes sense. And again, all three of these folks deserve all the credit for all the, I guarantee, just machinations they had to do. Uh,
absolutely. And then starting off a movement. And Container Solutions were not involved in its formation, but we were early sponsors and obviously massive community members. And it's been nice to have been a part of that. I must admit the conference is too big for me now. The last time I was here in Paris, the talks I wanted to go to were full, so you have to watch on a screen from outside. So it's a little bit too big for me. It's more a reflection of where I'm at psychologically. It's like, I can't cope. But that's a negative. But the positive is you see people that you've been working with for 10 years. That every corner you turn around, you see people you know. So the reunion element is absolutely fantastic.
yeah, and look, it's exactly a success disaster, right? I
Right,
mean,
right.
I can only think of one open source project that's more successful than Kubernetes, and that's the Linux kernel. I think across all of the open source projects, it has the most committers and the most like commit velocity, if that makes any sense. I mean, outrageously, I don't have the words really for how outrageously, amazingly successful it has been. You'll remember, and both of us will remember, and it wasn't too long ago, where it was like, oh, is Docker going to win, or is it going to be another container format? Is Kubernetes going to win, or is it going to be Docker Compose, or there was
Well,
even a third one.
you're probably thinking of Apache Mesos. For the first 2 years of Container Solutions life, we helped with all types of orchestrators. There was no guarantee that Kubernetes was going to be the winner, and it might seem like that now with hindsight bias. That was definitely not the case in 2014, 2015.
Yeah, and Mesos has been out much longer, actually. Again, the connection is Mesos was formed by former Googlers who went to Twitter and wanted Borg. So these are all Borg's children.
They're all the children of Borg. Yeah. Do you know? Have you got any insights to the name Borg? Where did that come from?
Sure, I'm a Star Trek fan, as many of us are. It's directly a reference to the Borg, which is a cyborg race of
Collective, isn't it?
it's the collective.
Yeah.
And so there's a hive mind, and it's biological creatures with mechanisms in them, and they're all connected up mentally. Yeah. So the
And of course, resistance to the Borg is futile, Randy, as you know.
futile. So the people that named Borg inside Google were Star Trek fans. The other aspect, we'll talk a little more about the naming because that's how I think we started this. So Kubernetes is a Greek word, and you connected it up with cybernetics when in the earlier podcast. That's actually a true connection. But as Brendan would tell it, well, one of the three, as they all would tell it, Kubernetes, the actual meaning of Kubernetes is pilot or helmsman. So imagine the person who's steering the ship. So that's why the Kubernetes logo is a helm's wheel, or how do you say it, like a ship wheel, and it has 7 points. Why does it have seven? Because riffing off of the Star Trek themed Borg name. The code name internally for what ultimately became Kubernetes was 7 of 9. So if you are a Star Trek fan of Star Trek Voyager, 7 of 9 was a human that was absorbed into the Borg collective and then freed by our heroic Voyager crew and then became a main character, as part of that crew, and then she continues on in the more modern Star Trek things as
Why
well.
seven? Did it have anything to do with being seven base components in Kubernetes, or where did the number
No,
come from?
7 of 9. So again,
Purely Star Trek.
7 of 9. So the seven again. Craig and Joe and Brendan get a vote here, but you can actually Google this, and this is my recollection is that
So I
again
wasn't planning to do this, but I've done it now. I don't know if you saw this on LinkedIn, but this is my new book, Randy, Visionaries, Rebels and Machines.
I'm
Now,
excited about.
I'm also a Star Trek fan. I'm gonna stop sharing now. But did you know so was Jeff Bezos? Were you aware that he was a Trekkie?
No, I did not know that.
And not only that, I have to put my reading glasses on now because I can't find where you've gone. And he was such a huge Star Trek fan, but he's also famous for thinking algorithmically. So when he was a child, his best friend would play Kirk, in role play. His other friend would play Spock, and Bezos played the computer.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I cover that story in chapter 10 of that book. So even the people we may or may not agree with in our community, being Star Trek fans is a bit of a common thing because I'm a massive Star Trek fan as well.
Yeah, I have been my whole life. My father, who's also a computer scientist and worked at Xerox PARC back in the day, he and all of the folks there were also big Star Trek fans.
Okay, well, Xerox Park also features heavily in my book, as you could probably imagine from the title. Right,
Right.
okay, back to Kubernetes. Randy, tell me, since those 10 years ago, when Borg was absolutely bossing it in Google and Kubernetes was just emerging, a fledgling bird, scuttering from the nest, how has it developed in the last 10 years and how does it compare in terms of functionality and feature richness and all of that type of stuff?
Yeah, I think it does. I think everybody involved with Kubernetes has every reason to be proud. And also, there are a lot of things you can do when you control the entire ecosystem. So the answer to your question is a little bit nuanced. Like, again, as I was mentioning, I think the insight about having the pod be the core idea as opposed to the individual container. That was quite revolutionary. The other aspect that was quite revolutionary is the and using the labels for everything. That's something that Borg doesn't quite do or didn't at the time.
For the benefit of some of our less experienced listeners or viewers, what is the difference between running containers together in a pod versus running them outside of a pod? Why was that a big breakthrough?
Because it's the unit that you actually have to think of. It's where the container is the manifest and the environment encapsulation. The pod is the deployment unit, right? So in a very common a very common Kubernetes use case is, again, I have my main application and then I have like little ancillary, essentially processes, right? Super lightweight. So I've got my little monitoring agent. I've got some sidecar that does, like Envoy, for example, that
Yeah.
does a network proxying. You can imagine one or several or even a whole constellation of little tiny processes that live next to and need to be deployed
And
next
they
to.
play together. And they play
And
together, so they have to stay together.
so those who play together stay together. I really like that. Yeah, so that was the insight. And again, what that particular one was Brendan, but the insight there was, hey, and all of the people who had worked on Borg, all three of them, and they had also used Borg in other areas, they just saw that, oh, here's how people actually do it. And how could they improve on the API and the like model, if that makes any sense, the programming model around Borg. Now, I think Borg's still ahead, but that's not even wrong because Borg had a 10, 12
Head start,
year
yeah,
head
yeah.
start. And Google has a lot of smart distributed systems engineers. And so I would be shocked if Google and Borg inside weren't 13 years better, because like they should be 13 years better. But Kubernetes is pretty good. And everybody, again, associated with that project should feel so incredibly proud of not only doing such an incredibly useful open source project, but they basically have taken Kubernetes basically is the API, the standard API for using the cloud. Full stop, end of story. And it's supplanted, I think, like we're AWS users and have been for a couple of, several successive companies of mine. And we don't usually leverage uh, Amazon's also good APIs for managing things. Instead, we use Kubernetes again because it's standard and because there's this whole ecosystem of CNCF related projects that are built around it.
And have Joe and Craig and Brendan ever given the definitive story together? Have they ever given the definitive history in a podcast like this?
Many times,
Oh, they
many
have.
times. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
they think of telling it. Maybe they need to write the book.
Yeah, let's see. So Craig has a new startup that's around security related stuff. Brendan works as a very, very senior individual contributor at Microsoft. And then Joe, I think is semi-retired, but I'm sure he's going to come back out and do something interesting soon
Yeah,
too.
maybe they'll come on this podcast. You never know. Now, Randy, we've managed to avoid Java today. So one of the problems of hosting a podcast when you're my age is very quickly you end up talking about Java or Hudson. We've avoided that, which is great. That's fantastic. However, another theme that emerged during the podcast, which was quite by surprise, is a number of our guests have spoken about imposter syndrome, their challenges in with their career, and their challenges either building teams or building software. And I suppose my question to you would be, what advice would you have for either your younger self or for people who are tuning into this podcast in terms of career development or dealing with imposter syndrome? What would you say to a younger Randy?
Wow. Well, I actually have a younger Randy, although his name is Sebastian. I have an 18-year-old who's the third generation of Shoup engineers. So actually, I can tell you some advice that I've given him. In no particular order, never stop learning, because our industry changes fast. It changes faster and faster. That change accelerates. And so just always keep learning. And even somebody who starts out not knowing as much as another person, the steepness of their learning curve will absolutely overtake somebody who comes out, and I was just having this conversation last night, somebody who comes out with a PhD from a fancy university, but like has a relatively flat or, not very steep learning curve. The person who comes out with no degree or a half a degree or whatever, but with a steeper learning curve, absolutely is gonna overtake them.
Often that goes quicker than people think. They think, oh, maybe I'll catch up in 4 years. But actually, once somebody starts to become a bit complacent with the learning and you keep at it every week, you'll find in 6 to 9 months you've caught up, and 9 months after that, you've left them in the dirt.
Yeah, yeah, and the other thing that's related to that is I just learned this phrase yesterday, literally, be an adaptive generalist rather than a specialist. And so, one of the problems, I have a lot of PhDs in my family, I'm not one of them, but a potential critique one might have, inside or outside of such programs, is you get so deep in some particular area that you're laser focused and, oh, well, I only do this type of computational fluid dynamics. But like there's whole other, there are whole other things around it. And my point then is, as a young person or even as a older middle-aged person, hi Jamie, hi Randy, is continuing to see the whole board and adapt as the environment changes.
Now, it's so funny you should say that at this very moment. So I'm going to hold up a book for the screen. So for people listening on the podcast, this is The Practice of Management by Peter Drucker. And it was
Yeah.
really groundbreaking. It's from 1954. You see a lot of highlighted text there. What Drucker says is that if you want to become a manager, that's fine, but it has to be a choice and you can't be a specialist. And the whole point of the book is you have to be an adaptive generalist. That's not a term that Drucker uses because it wasn't a term back then. But the point is you need to understand the business, but really you need to understand how to adapt the business. And you can only do that by adapting your own thinking and by becoming a lifelong learner. So in many ways, that was a pretty good guide. I mean, in a way, he was half a century ahead of his time, you know.
Yeah, and I think all of the people that we look back on and admire in science and technology and the arts are all of these adaptive generalists, right? Think Leonardo da Vinci, think Edison, think all these different people have done these amazing things. It is rare to find somebody that has made a long-lasting impact on the world that is only a point solution, if that
Absolutely.
makes any sense.
And so practically, then for our listeners, you're in a job, but you can't start reading books at 11 o'clock in the morning. How do you keep learning? How did you do that, Randy? Were you going on lunch sessions? Were you going to conferences? Were you hitting the books?
It's a great question. I do read a lot. I've always been quite interested in lots of different things. So I'm very interested in distributed systems. That's sort of what I've been doing for the last, whatever, 20, 30 years. So I'm interested in that, but like a lot of evolutionary biology for a long time, a lot of linguistics for a long time. I'm just interested in lots of different things. Thinking Fast and Slow, which is about
Yeah,
cognition, and got
good
the
book.
Nobel
That very
Prize.
good book.
Yeah. Oh, a
Yeah.
tremendous, tremendous book. I can't tell you how often I'm using talking about system one thinking versus system two thinking. It's one of those things like once you see it, you can't unsee it.
No, it's a genuine progression of psychological research. So if you go from Maslow and behaviorism and all of that, it was all wobbling around the same. But then I think in the late 70s, Kahneman literally took psychology a solid step forward. It's repeatable, it's measurable. It was a serious contribution.
Yeah, and there's so much, and it directly relates to the physicality of the brain too. Like, system two thinking is the neocortex, executive function, decision making, reflection, and there's a part of the brain that's that. It's the neocortex, neo for new. It's like the
Yeah.
newest part of the mammalian brain, the one that's the most humanist. I'm intentionally messing with the word, but like the thing that different, one of the few things DNA wise that differentiates us from the other great apes, is the development of that thing. Whereas system one thinking is the oldest part of the mammalian brain, right? The amygdala, and its instinct and its quick reaction and its bias, which is both good and bad, right? Bias when like, hey, a lion's chasing me. Like, I'm not going to sit there and go, well, he's running quickly at me. It's possible he's not going to, he seems like a nice lion.
He might
Like,
be a nice lion.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but no, the bias, and that's actually not even wrong in that moment, is like, I better run. And it is only later that we might have the reflection that, oh, maybe the lion is running from an elephant. You know what I mean? Like, anyway, so there's a reason why we are all still here. It's because in the millions and billions of years of evolution that have formed us, the people that didn't react quickly when something bad happened, they're gone. And the people
Absolutely.
or the apes or the vertebrates that reproduced were the ones that, okay, lion chasing, get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so system one, system two, both super adaptive, both absolutely useful. So it's not like one's better than the other, but the goal is to use them both together effectively.
Absolutely. What people don't realize is when you use system two more, when you choose to be conscious and deliberate, you'll make better decisions, but you won't be any happier because making good decisions requires looking in the mirror, thinking about stuff. So system two is absolutely related to anxiety. It's the difference between writing creatively, that feels great, or editing, where you start start to criticize yourself and it feels awesome. So I always say you've got to be courageous to switch on system two. You've got to have the guts to feel embarrassed, ashamed, and a bit nervous if you're to get to that decent decision.
Wow, you just taught me something. The other thing, though, which is absolutely related, is well, why don't we use System 2 all the time? Well, A, it's slow, and B, it's outrageously energy
It's
intensive.
exhausting. Yeah.
That's the other thing. You can imagine, like, oh, I have to think so
Yeah.
hard about this.
You know, so it's exhausting, but so one of the secrets of my success, if you could, if you could categorize some of the things I've done as successful, is I learned when I started running Container Solutions as the founder and the CEO. If I wasn't physically fit, my decisions got worse and worse. So my fitness and my System 2 systems are 100% related because I needed to make more System 2 decisions than I normally would. That required energy and it required me to carve out time. So I'm not saying that all leaders have to be physically fit, but I think there is a correlation between physical stamina and the System 2 decisions you make.
I mean, I think you're maybe being humble in saying it that way, but like you're absolutely right, right? And is it possible to do System 2 thinking without it? No, but you need more energy. I mean, again, it's outrageously energy
Yeah,
intensive. That
it's
energy's
got
got
to
to
come
come
from
from
somewhere.
somewhere. Energy's
It's
got to come from
exactly, you know what it's like when you're in a meeting, you're there for an hour, you're trying to work out with your executive team, and then you're exhausted when you finish. Well, why are you exhausted? Yeah, System 2. That's the
Yeah,
reason.
you were exactly, and even knowing all the things that we're just saying, it's like, well, we're in this room for I don't know 6 or 8 hours, and we took our breaks. Why am I exhausted at the end of it? Why? It's because I thought the whole
Yeah,
time,
that's
the
right.
entire time was thinking and reflecting and brainstorming, and that's exhausting. And so that's why coming back to KubeCon, which I'm not at, but maybe next time, is why our conference is exhausting. I mean, partly because it's a lot of people and
Yeah.
there's an angle there, but the other is like you're there to learn and to think. So there's no instinctive reaction. You don't get to fall back on the like easy system one thinking. It's all system two the whole day. It's like, why is it exhausting at the end of every conference day?
Exactly. And then you've got no willpower left at 6 o'clock, so you start drinking.
And then you miss the keynote the next day because you're sleeping in.
Yeah, that's right. Now, on that happy note, Randy, thank you so much for coming on. We're gonna launch this podcast more or less straight away, so the people at KubeCon can have a listen in the evenings or on the trips back.
Yeah, love it.
So,
I just will say thanks for the opportunity to talk with you, Jamie. Always, always love talking with you. And again, my great thanks to those Kubernetes founders who have given us not just this great piece of software, but this entire community that is so big that Jamie doesn't want to go to the conference anymore.
I think that's a great way to end it. So you've been Randy, I've been Jamie. Thank you so much, listeners, and we'll see you next time. Bye.